Today I am sharing with you guys 5 things that you can do to put yourself in the best position for foregoing or declining the epidural, if that is what you are choosing to pursue in your choice to have a more natural labor. There is a quote, and I can't remember who it came from, so pardon me that I don't know who to attribute it to, but there's a quote that says, "You are planning to fail if you fail to plan." And I do not want that for you in your birth when it comes to your choice to not get the epidural. So here I am helping equip you to feel strong, feel confident, and to feel knowledgeable in how you can best prepare for an unmedicated birth. So let's get into it. Longing for a birth free from unnecessary interventions? One where you feel confident, empowered, and at peace, trusting your body to work as God designed? If so, you're in the right place. I'm Audrey, a Bible-believing Christian, childbirth educator, wife, and mama of 4, 2 born via C-section and 2 born at home. I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed by birth decisions, to wonder if you're crunchy enough for an unmedicated labor, or to fear another intervention-heavy birth. But with education, practical tools, biblical encouragement, and most importantly, by trusting the Lord, you can prepare for a natural birth with clarity, confidence, and even joy, and I'm here to help you do just that. So grab your water bottle, settle in, and let's prepare you to trust God's design for your body, your baby, and your faithful labor. Well, hey gang, so as promised from last week's late episode that I posted on Saturday instead of the usual Wednesdays, we are getting back into the epidural mini-series today, and this one and then one more are the last 2 of this little mini-series. And like I've said before, I know it's kind of weird, me as a natural birth advocate, crunchy, go for the most holistic route that you can kind of gal is talking about the epidural, but it really is important that we understand all the options given to us in our births. And in the 21st century, the epidural is one of those options. Now, most of you ladies listening to this podcast are likely here because learning about natural birth, a more holistic approach, trying for an unmedicated birth is the path you want to take. And it is my greatest hope that I can inspire and encourage and educate you on that journey to get you there. However, I still think it's very valuable to have this knowledge on this most common intervention in your back pocket, because sometimes, although not all the times, and again, I'm here to help you and be the wind underneath your wings to get you to that natural delivery, but sometimes plans change, things have to pivot, and I would much rather you know what the epidural is, what the pros are, what the cons are, and how to avoid it, which is what we're going to talk about in today's episode, than to just, you know what, I'm not going to get the epidural, and then you just never think about it, never educate yourself on it. And I just don't think that's the right path forward either. I don't think we need to close our eyes and pretend like it doesn't exist, because it does. And in the next episode, so not the one we're doing today, but in the next episode, I will be talking about some instances when the epidural might be the better call for you. And I know that that's like, what on earth are you talking about? I am not here for that. And that's fine. You can totally skip out on that episode. But I have found sometimes the thing that we are scared of the most, we try to ignore or push to the back burner. But what if things change in your birth plan or something comes up unexpected and the thing that you most dreaded or you fought so hard not to be on the table comes to the forefront of what you need to make a decision about, and you have done zero education? I would hate that for you. So in my mind, being educated about all the interventions, all the different avenues that birth can take is much better than trying to ignore it and just try to remain ignorant of it in hopes that it leaves you alone. I think that's true across the board. I believe informed consent is valuable whether you're planning a home birth or a hospital birth, to know all the ins and outs of all the options you have in front of you, the pros, the cons, when it might be necessary, when it's definitely not necessary, the cascade of interventions that could make it necessary, and how to avoid those. All of those things are important, and I want you guys to be well versed in them. And so that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to educate. I'm here to help you guys make sense of things along the way when it comes to birth options, when it comes to the interventions at your disposal. And so that is the very long answer of why I think it's important to cover the epidural and why I'm doing this whole little mini series. So there you have it. And before we get into the actual meat of today's episode, I did want to let you guys know that my Facebook group is finally available. If you are looking for something outside of just this podcast to give you more education and more resources, even a place where you can come into community with other Christian moms that are pursuing birth similarly to you in a more natural, holistic form, then this Facebook group is something I really hope to be able to offer you that is a blessing, not a burden in the form of social media, because I know sometimes it can just be a time suck and it can feel so overwhelming with the amount of voices and ads and people selling to you, all that kind of stuff. I hope that this group is somewhat of a haven where you can come with questions, you can come with needing encouragement, you can come with a desire to meet other moms that have maybe gone a little further down this whole natural birth route road than you have, or maybe you can pass along your wisdom to other mamas who need it in the group. If you're looking for a place like that, this group will hopefully be that for you. So come on and join, free to do, and I'll be popping in there with tidbits, education, like I already said, and just gives me an opportunity to actually get to know you guys on the other side of this little fuzzy mic I'm talking into. So I would love to see you guys in there, and the link for that is in the show notes. And if you're thinking to yourself, no, Audrey, that's not even enough, I need more. Well, I actually have more for you. You can sign up for my newsletter, and I'm sure there will be things that I put in the Facebook group that also go out in my bi-weekly newsletter, but I'm hoping to have this newsletter kind of be like my pen pal emails to you guys, where I'm going to include more education, obviously, lots more encouragement, lots more conversational, like we're sitting down for coffee, and lots of just pointing you to Jesus. I love to write. I loved the idea of blogging earlier in my 20s whenever I had more time and I had less kids. But that's just not what the Lord had for me, and that's okay. Here I am podcasting. But I think I do have the bandwidth to send out a newsletter every other week to you guys as just a little bit more intimate chit-chat time. I'm also going to have freebies that I send out through there and more resources. I'm actually also going to include links for different education and different articles and different research that I find along the way. So hopefully that can take a little stress, a little bit of, man, there's so much to sift through, off of your shoulders in terms of birth education and just acquiring more knowledge and understanding of everything that's out there in the birth world. So that is another thing available to you, and the link for that will also be in the show notes if that interests you. Now, let's dive in. So today we are talking about the 5 things you need to do if you want to avoid getting the epidural. So whether you've just got this sincere desire to experience birth naturally because you already trust and understand how wonderfully God designed your body for labor, or you're like me, like I was, with my first VBAC, and you want to skip the epidural because you're wanting to do everything you can to stay away from that cascade of medical interventions. But whatever angle you're coming at this from, I do hope this episode makes you feel more confident in your choice and ability to forgo the epidural if that is what you're choosing to do. Number 1, get educated on physiological birth. One of the biggest reasons women opt for an epidural is fear. Fear of pain, fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, all of that. and more, I'm sure. But that is the biggest drive, it would seem. In those moments when you reach the capacity in what you think that you can handle in your body, whatever fear is arising within you from any assortment of drives, that is usually the thing that really gets women to the point of, yes, I need something to save me from this. And what we need to think about is we have to figure out what the antidote of fear is. Now, from a Christian standpoint, we know that the antidote of fear is faith in the Lord, or trusting the Lord. When you think about all the times throughout Scripture that we are commanded to not fear, or somebody specifically is told by the Lord through the form of an angel or from God Himself, Jesus, do not fear. What is being said aside from do not fear or some variation of that is the underlying choice. Because in order to not fear, you have to choose something different. And every single time that admonition, that call to reject or put away fear is given, the other option in those moments is to trust in God. Trust what He says in that moment. Trust Him by taking His hand, having faith. Trust that He's going to step in and do something to save the moment, calm the storm, whatever it is. But fear and trust do not go hand in hand. You cannot be trusting and also fearful. You're choosing one or the other. So that is what that looks like for our Christian faith. But how can we look at that as it relates to birth? Well, understanding how your body was designed to birth can replace fear with confidence. Confidence that your body was designed to do this hard, intense work, going through even the pain of birth, if that's the way you want to formulate thinking about the contractions or pressure or intensity, all those things. Your body was made for it. And obviously, we do live in a fallen world that is not in its perfect glorified state yet, because it is still tainted by sin. And so things don't always go as planned. But in regards to a natural, healthy, no complications delivery, where a woman's body is just doing the very things God innately designed it to do, there can be total confidence that your body was built to take you all the way through birth, and experiencing those sensations, in feeling the pressure and feeling the pushing, in stretching to make way for baby. All of those things were wisely and intentionally designed by God for a female's body to do. So understanding that entire process will fill you with confidence and will decrease the fear. Research actually shows that women who take childbirth education classes, especially those focused on physiological birth and really understanding the nitty-gritty of how the body is moving during birth, how the baby's body is moving together in tandem with the mom during birth, those women are significantly more likely to birth without an epidural. Learning about how oxytocin and endorphins and the beta endorphins, which is our body's natural pain reliever that God built in for us to be released during labor to help us manage the intensity of contractions. Understanding how those hormones work together to help labor start, to help us bond with our baby, to help us manage contractions. All of that put together, along with the physiological birth education, can better help us learn to trust the process instead of fear it. Moving into number 2. And this one happens long before you arrive at the hospital or the birth center or have somebody walk into your house for your home birth. It can really make all the difference. It is choosing the right birth team. So I know not everyone has the luxury of getting to do a birth center birth or even a home birth. However, even if you are planning to have this natural birth at the hospital, there are providers, or there can be providers in their area that will be willing to slow down, cut back on the interventions, and really support you in your desire to birth unmedicated. But it does take you really digging in and making sure you're finding the right one. And if you're listening to this right now and you're a little bit further down in your pregnancy than the very beginning, and you're thinking to yourself, oh man, my desire for an unmedicated birth is already feeling like an uphill battle that I'm going to have to fight when I show up at the hospital. Just hear me when I tell you, from experience and talking to other moms who have also lived this out, you can switch providers. It might be later in your pregnancy. It might feel really awkward and not really certain how to make it happen, but it can happen, especially if as you're making this decision, you are intentionally praying about it with your husband and with friends, with trusted friends, and seeking the Lord's will for you. If the Lord knows that that is the best path for you to take, He's going to make a way for it to happen. So there's my little tangent on that. You are not too far gone. You can switch. But studies have also shown that if you can't switch providers, or if you don't think that's the best move and the Lord doesn't make that path clear for you, studies have also shown that continuous labor support, particularly from a trained doula, reduces the likelihood of epidural use by up to 60%. So say you live in a small town, or say you live somewhere where every provider is really heavy on pushing interventions, and you don't feel like you'll be able to experience a low intervention birth without a lot of advocacy by your husband or a lot of fighting for yourself, and that scares you a little bit, which, by the way, you can still do it, but having someone on your team, having a trained doula to be there to support you, to educate you on your choices, that can make such a huge difference. Even if that is the only thing that after listening to this podcast you change in your birth provider choices, it's just hiring a doula, even doing that can really have a profound impact on you being able to not get that epidural. Now, if you are early in your pregnancy still, you haven't quite committed to any one provider yet, if you are looking into things, if you're Googling different providers and you're looking for reviews, or you're talking to friends in your community, or even doing something like finding a local mom's Facebook group in your area, asking questions about, hey, who did you use as your provider for your births in this area? Did you have a natural delivery with them? Did they adhere to your birth plan and your wishes? Just asking those kind of things and putting your feelers out there. People really do like to give their reviews and their opinions on things. So if you find a group like that, you might get some really valuable insight. But looking for a provider who is not quick to offer interventions and who fully supports unmedicated birth, that is huge, especially if you're here listening and you're at the beginning of your pregnancy. So this could look like hiring a midwife, and midwives, generally speaking, not all of them, but many are well versed in a natural physiological birth. They know when things are off, which makes them so great at getting their clients to transfer to the hospital before there becomes an emergency, because they have seen so many untouched natural progressions of birth that they can tell when something's off much quicker than somebody in the hospital who has interventions readily accessible to dive in and save the day. So they're not really looking for, steps 2, 3, and 4 way down the road before you get to the emergency in the same way that a midwife has to, because they don't have access to that immediate surgical, whatever type of emergency intervention to the same degree as a hospital does. Even though most midwives do have immediate emergency care equipment, obviously the hospital is going to have more of those. But this might mean hiring a midwife who is more friendly toward letting you birth naturally without offering a lot of interventions, unless your body or your baby is showing signs that you might need a little bit more support, or your baby might need a little bit more support. But for the most part, they're hands off. This might look like finding a doula. It might look like hiring a childbirth educator, like a personal childbirth educator who can be on call for you for all your questions, text support, that kind of thing. It could also look like making sure your partner is well prepared to advocate for your wishes. You could sit down with your husband and go over your birth plan with him. Have him meet with the doula with you. Have him take the childbirth education course with you. All of those things can be so pivotal and can be a part of your process of choosing the right birth team, or I guess making the right birth team. I mean, in a sense, you are trying to assemble the Avengers of birth here. You really want a rock star team supporting you. And that takes intentionality. You don't just snap your fingers and the gang's all there. You've got to go out and seek them and or train them to be who you know you're going to need in your labor. And a couple of questions that you could ask the provider that you're interviewing, because you are interviewing them because they work for you. Remember that. You could ask them things like, what is your epidural rate? Or do you support movement in labor? Or am I going to have to be strapped up to a monitor laying in bed the whole time? How do you handle longer labors? How long are you going to let me go without trying to push an intervention on me? Well, you can say it differently than that, but trying to ask these open-ended questions to get a better feel for how naturally minded, or at least open to a natural labor, the provider you're considering is or isn't. Okay, gang, so my episode that you just listened to the first half of was very long-winded, and I ended up talking quite a bit longer for those last 3 things that you can be doing to avoid an epidural. So I am actually going to break this episode up into 2 parts. So if you would like to hear those 3 other things, go ahead and check out part 2 for the conclusion of this episode. I hope the first part of this episode blessed you, and I hope that the latter half also is equally as helpful to you as well. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks for joining me today, friend. If you were encouraged by or learned some new helpful nugget through listening to today's episode, the best way to let me know is by leaving a written review on Apple Podcasts and sharing the show with a friend. Taking 30 seconds to leave a review and share an episode might feel like no big deal, but it truly means so much to receive your feedback and know that this podcast is getting out there to more mamas who need it. Before we part ways until next Wednesday, I'd like to pray Ephesians 3:20 over you. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, I pray that God would be mightily glorified through you as you seek to honor him with your faithful labor. Amen, and God bless.